Have you ever noticed how an argument can start with logic, facts, and calm phrases, yet end with silence, guilt, or emotional pressure? Someone speaks clearly, explains what is real, and believes the issue is about truth. But suddenly, emotion enters the room. Tears, disappointment, or hurt feelings replace reason. When that happens, logic stops working, and the dynamic quietly shifts. Most men believe arguments are about who is right and who is wrong. A man enters a discussion thinking it's about solving a problem in a relationship. Women, however, often experience something different. When emotion appears, the argument is no longer about facts. It becomes about love, intention, and moral positioning. The one who controls emotion controls the direction of the conversation. This is where many men feel confused. They used the right phrases, stayed calm, and spoke honestly. Yet somehow they are the ones apologizing. The issue is no longer about what happened, but about how someone feels. When emotion takes control, reality bends. Logic becomes secondary, and emotional framing becomes the real weapon in the argument. This video is not about blaming women or glorifying men. It is about understanding a real psychological pattern in relationships. When emotion is used strategically, it can override logic, silence resistance, and reshape outcomes. Once you see how this works, you will never experience arguments the same way again. At the surface level, most people believe arguments exist to reach understanding. Someone says something, the other responds, and together they search for what is real. Men often approach conflict this way. A man assumes the discussion is about solving a problem in the relationship. He focuses on facts, timelines, and clear phrases, believing logic will naturally lead to resolution. But when emotion enters, the structure of the argument changes. Women often experience conflicts not as a logical exchange, but as an emotional event. When feelings are triggered, the question is no longer what happened, but how did this make me feel? In that moment, emotion becomes evidence. Feelings are treated as proof, even when logic suggests otherwise. This creates a hidden imbalance. When emotion is accepted as truth, logic is forced to defend itself. Men suddenly find themselves justifying facts against feelings. The argument shifts from reality to perception, from events to intention, from behavior to love. Whoever controls emotional framing controls what the argument is about. The real question then is not why logic fails, but why emotion is allowed to replace it. In many relationships, emotional expression is socially protected. Questioning it feels cruel, challenging it feels wrong, and this is exactly where emotional leverage quietly becomes psychological power. To understand why emotion defeats logic, you must understand how the brain reacts under pressure. When an argument begins calmly, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, remains active. This is where men usually operate. But the moment strong emotion appears, the limbic system takes control. Fear, sadness, and emotional pain are processed faster than logic, making emotion feel more real than facts. When someone cries, withdraws, or expresses emotional distress, the brain of the other person reacts instinctively. A man may feel urgency, guilt, or responsibility, even if he is logically correct. The brain shifts from problem-solving to threat reduction. The argument stops being about what happened and becomes about restoring emotional safety in the relationship. This neurological shift explains why emotional arguments feel impossible to win. Logic requires time and cognitive effort. Emotion demands immediate response. When women use emotion, consciously or not, they activate a biological shortcut. The brain prioritizes feelings over truth, connection over accuracy, and love over logic. This is not weakness. It is how human psychology is wired. To understand how emotion becomes a weapon, you must look inside the inner world of personality. Some women are naturally oriented toward emotional awareness. They feel shifts in tone, silence, and intention long before words appear. For them, conflict is not about winning with logic, but about protecting emotional position. Someone who lives this way experiences arguments as emotional threats, not intellectual debates. This internal sensitivity shapes how reality is interpreted. When emotion rises, it feels real, urgent, and undeniable. A phrase spoken calmly by a man can be interpreted as cold or dismissive. The meaning is filtered through feeling, not fact. In relationships, this creates a pattern where emotional experience outweighs objective truth, even when logic clearly explains what happened. Men often misunderstand this dynamic. They assume emotion equals loss of control. In reality, it is a different control system. Women who rely on emotion are not confused. They are navigating from an internal map shaped by feelings, love, and perceived safety. When logic threatens that inner balance, emotion emerges to restore dominance over the direction of the argument. Emotional strategies do not appear randomly. They are shaped early through environment and upbringing. From childhood, many women learn that direct confrontation is discouraged, while emotional expression is accepted and protected. When a girl shows sadness or distress, someone listens. When she explains logically, she's often ignored. Over time, emotion becomes the most reliable way to be heard. This conditioning follows them into adulthood and relationships. When conflict appears, emotion feels safer than logic. It feels familiar. A woman learns that expressing hurt invites care, while arguing facts risks rejection. In contrast, men are often raised to suppress emotion and rely on reasoning. This creates a clash of conflict styles long before love even enters the equation. The result is not manipulation by design, but effectiveness by repetition. Emotion works because it has always worked. When an argument threatens stability in a relationship, emotional response activates instinctive protection from both sides. What feels natural to women feels confusing to men, and this imbalance quietly turns emotion into psychological leverage. Social norms quietly protect emotional behavior while questioning logic-based resistance. When women express emotion in an argument, society often labels it as natural, honest, and real. But when a man challenges those emotions with facts or calm phrases, he risks being seen as cold or uncaring. The focus shifts from what is true to how someone feels, and logic becomes socially unsafe. This creates a dangerous misunderstanding in relationships. Men believe they are discussing behavior, actions, and outcomes. Women believe they are defending emotional reality. When these two systems collide, emotion is automatically granted moral authority. Someone who feels hurt is assumed to be right, while someone who explains calmly is assumed to lack love or empathy. Over time, this imbalance trains men to retreat. They stop explaining, stop questioning, and stop defending logic. Silence becomes self-protection. Women, often unaware of this effect, learn that emotion ends conflict faster than discussion. What looks like harmony on the surface is often unresolved tension underneath, where misunderstanding replaces real resolution. Take Leodra and Hyaxa, married for 12 years. Hyaxa is a logical man. When conflict appears in the relationship, he prefers calm phrases and clear explanations. One night, he confronts Leodra about repeated financial decisions made without discussion. He explains timelines, numbers, and what is real. At first, the conversation feels stable. Then Leodra's tone shifts, and the atmosphere changes. Instead of responding to the facts, Leodra speaks about how the conversation makes her feel. She says she feels unappreciated, controlled, and unloved. The issue is no longer about money. It becomes about love and intention. When Hyaxa insists on returning to the topic, Leodra grows more emotional. Someone is now hurt, and logic suddenly feels cruel. Hyaxa backs down. Not because he was wrong, but because emotional tension feels dangerous. He apologizes for the way he spoke, even though the facts remain unchanged. Leodra feels validated. The argument ends, but the problem does not. Over time, Hyaxa learns that logic costs peace, while silence preserves it. Emotion has quietly won the argument. Again, the psychological concept behind this pattern is called emotional framing dominance. It occurs when emotion defines the meaning of an interaction before logic can evaluate it. When someone expresses strong feelings, the brain prioritizes emotional reality over factual accuracy. In relationships, this means whoever controls emotional framing controls what the argument is about, regardless of what actually happened. Once emotion becomes the frame, logic is forced into defense. A man is no longer explaining behavior, he is explaining his intention. Phrases meant to clarify are reinterpreted as attacks. The argument shifts from events to character. When feelings are treated as truth, questioning them feels immoral. This is why emotion feels unbeatable. It is not arguing facts, it is redefining reality. This is not about women being irrational, it is about power dynamics. Emotion carries moral authority because society treats emotional pain as proof. Someone who feels hurt is seen as real, while someone who explains calmly is seen as detached. In this structure, logic loses not because it is wrong, but because it is socially disarmed before it can function. Consider Gunawan and Rihanna, married for 8 years, both highly driven in their careers. Gunawan values structure and clarity in the relationship. When tension appears, he prefers direct discussion. One evening, he raises concerns about Rihanna repeatedly cancelling shared plans. He explains dates, patterns, and what is real. His intention is resolution, not conflict. At first, Rihanna listens quietly, and the conversation feels controlled. Then the emotional shift happens. Rihanna says the discussion makes her feel pressured and unappreciated. She speaks about exhaustion, emotional neglect, and lack of love. The topic moves away from cancelled plans and toward emotional suffering. When Gunawan attempts to return to the original issue, his phrases are reframed as insensitivity. Logic now feels like an attack on her emotional reality. Gunawan feels trapped. Continuing the discussion risks appearing cold. He reassures her, apologizes for the timing, and drops the issue. Rihanna feels understood. The argument ends peacefully, but the pattern remains unchanged. Over time, Gunawan learns that facts create tension, while emotional surrender restores calm. In this relationship, emotion does not just influence arguments, it decides them. When men realize this pattern, the instinctive response is either withdrawal or emotional submission. Both are mistakes. Healthy adaptation begins with understanding that emotion does not need to be fought, but it must not replace reality. A man must learn to acknowledge how someone feels without surrendering what is real. Validation of emotion is not the same as surrendering logic. Effective coping requires emotional discipline. When emotion escalates, slowing the pace of the conversation is critical. Calm pauses, neutral phrases, and steady tone prevent emotional framing from hijacking the discussion. This is not coldness, it is control. When men stop reacting emotionally to emotional pressure, the dynamic shifts. Emotion loses urgency when it finds no immediate leverage. Adaptation also means setting boundaries inside the relationship. If every discussion becomes about feelings, nothing is ever resolved. Men must gently but firmly redirect conversations back to behavior and outcomes. This balance, respecting emotion while protecting logic, is rare but powerful. It transforms arguments from emotional battles into structured dialogue where neither emotion nor reason dominates unchecked. At this stage, many men ask a dangerous question. Should women change the way they argue, or should men simply adapt? Psychology gives a complex answer. Emotional expression itself is not the problem. Emotion becomes destructive only when it replaces accountability. A relationship cannot function when feelings are treated as untouchable truth, and logic is dismissed as emotional insensitivity. Modern psychology suggests balance, not suppression. Women do not need to silence emotion, and men do not need to abandon logic. But both must recognize when emotion is being used to control outcomes. When every disagreement becomes a test of love rather than behavior, growth stops. Someone is protected, someone retreats, and real issues remain unresolved beneath the surface. Change does not mean becoming colder or harder. It means becoming aware. Men must stop confusing emotional pressure with moral authority. Women must recognize when emotion shifts from expression to dominance. Only then can a relationship move from emotional victory to mutual understanding, where neither side wins by silencing the other. In emotional arguments, silence is often misunderstood as weakness. In reality, silence can be psychological strength. When emotion escalates and seeks reaction, silence removes its fuel. A man who stays calm, grounded, and present without immediately responding disrupts emotional framing. The argument no longer moves forward on emotional momentum, and control quietly shifts back to awareness. Silence forces emotion to face itself. Without instant reassurance, apology, or defense, emotional pressure loses direction. Someone must then confront the real issue rather than hide behind feeling. This is uncomfortable, especially in a relationship where emotion has always ended discussions. But silence is not withdrawal. It is deliberate restraint, choosing not to be pulled into emotional dominance. Used correctly, silence creates clarity. It allows emotion to settle and logic to re-enter the space. Men who master this understand that not every feeling requires immediate response. By refusing to react impulsively, they protect their sense of reality and self-respect. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance. It is emotional authority exercised without force. When you step back and observe this dynamic from a wider angle, a larger pattern becomes clear. This is not just about individual arguments. It is about how power moves inside a relationship. Emotion and logic are not enemies, but they operate on different rules. When one is socially protected and the other is morally restricted, imbalance becomes inevitable. Men often believe love means emotional sacrifice. Women often believe love means emotional recognition. When these beliefs collide, emotion gains leverage. Someone who feels hurt gains authority, while someone who explains behavior loses ground. Over time, the relationship quietly reorganizes itself around emotional dominance, not mutual understanding or shared reality. The big picture is this: arguments are never just about words. They're about control, safety, and identity. Whoever defines what is real inside the relationship holds power. Until men and women recognize this psychological structure, arguments will continue to feel confusing, unfair, and unresolved, because they were never truly about logic to begin with. By now, the pattern should feel familiar. Arguments that begin with logic slowly transform into emotional negotiations. What starts as a discussion about behavior becomes a test of love, care, and intention. Men enter these conversations seeking clarity, but leave questioning themselves, not because they were wrong, but because emotion quietly reframed the entire conflict. Understanding this does not make someone cold or detached. It makes them aware. Awareness changes how you listen, how you respond, and how you hold your ground. When you see how emotion can override reality, you stop reacting impulsively. You pause, you observe, you choose your words carefully, knowing the argument is no longer just about facts. This is the moment where power shifts back to consciousness. When emotion no longer surprises you, it loses its advantage. Logic does not need to attack emotion, it only needs to survive it. And once that happens, arguments stop feeling like battles and start revealing what they truly are: reflections of deeper psychological dynamics within the relationship. Now ask yourself honestly, how many times have you experienced this dynamic in a real relationship? How often did an argument shift from facts to feelings, from behavior to love, from clarity to confusion? Someone may have told you that you were insensitive, uncaring, or wrong when all you did was speak logically. These moments are not random. They follow a pattern once you learn to see it. If you are a man, reflect on how often you chose silence to keep peace. If you are a woman, reflect on when emotion replaced discussion. Awareness is not about blame, it is about responsibility. A relationship cannot grow when one side controls reality through feeling and the other retreats through restraint. Real connection requires both emotional honesty and logical accountability. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you seen this pattern play out in your own life? If this video helped you understand relationship dynamics more clearly, support the channel by engaging with it. The more people understand these psychological structures, the less power unconscious patterns have over love, communication, and control. Join the conversation by sharing your experience in the comments. Your story may help someone recognize a pattern they could not explain before. If this breakdown resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs clarity, and subscribe to the channel. The more men and women understand these psychological dynamics, the less control unconscious emotional patterns have over relationships.